Hello guys and welcome to my channel. This is Mod. Today my video is gonna be about the Radious mod again. I'm gonna be covering the Nurgle faction and their new unit that's been added with this mod. Total of 28 units. Like usual, the Radious team came up with their own balancing for the new units. Usually all the new units that's provided with this mod are just to fill the gaps for the faction that's been lacking. In terms of Nurgle, mostly it's infantry units, but lots of different variants of them. You're gonna have the new units that can hold their lines very well, have units who deal lots of armor piercing damage, and also that I think the Nurgle faction was lacking is units who can kill large enemy entities. Also, you got a little bit of new monsters and some new very heavy cavalry who also can deal tons of damage to either large entities or smaller enemies. As you guys can see, these new units have a really cool icons. All these units are gonna look like they belong to a Nurgle faction. Some of them might not be lore friendly, some of them are. Hope you guys gonna like them. Also keep in mind, this Radious mod is being constantly updated. Their team is trying their best to keep this mod up to date, so in the future they might add some new units. We'll see about that. I had this mod from the start when it was just first released for Warhammer 3, and they definitely added some new units for certain factions. So if you're watching this video 1 year after it was released, don't be surprised that some of the units might be a little bit different or might be not in the picture at all. And please, before we start this video, I would really appreciate if you guys gonna subscribe under my channel if you like what I'm posting. And if you like this video, please leave the like. And don't be shy to leave a comment what you think about the new Nurgle units from Radious mod. Let's begin. In vanilla game, Nurgle didn't have a lot of tier 1 infantry units to fill the battlefield, but with Radious mod we have a bunch of them, like Tribesmen of Nurgle, this one with shields. Costs a little bit more than the regular Marauders of Nurgle. It doesn't have the poison melee attacks, but it got the Cloud of Lies, which gives it +10 to its melee defense. It has more physical resistance, up to 10%, than the regular Marauders of Nurgle. It also got Strider and a Vanguard deployment. Also, their stats are a little bit better than regular Marauders of Nurgle, and due to their Cloud of Lies, they're much better at defending themselves, and obviously the defense in this game is more important than actual offense. Therefore, they're gonna win the battle against Marauders of Nurgle with shield. Their version with great weapons is something similar to Marauders of Nurgle with great weapons. Slightly better stats, no poison melee attacks. They also have armor piercing weapons. Just like the previous version, their passive abilities are the same. Also the same amount of resistance. They will do better than vanilla Marauders of Nurgle, just for a slightly higher price. This unit is gonna be decent at the start of your game to deal with armored enemies, if there's going to be any, for example dwarves, and with their Vanguard deployment you can actually surprise the enemy army with this decent unit. Their version with dual weapons, I feel like this is a very useful unit, especially for the early game, because it has bonus versus infantry, and usually dual weapons units don't have much melee defense, so their Cloud of Lies will give them a nice bonus for their melee defense and also 10% for their physical resist, so they can stay longer in fight and definitely bring you more kills against the enemy infantry, so you can win your battle. Also, their Strider ability just ignores all the combat penalties caused by terrain, which is also useful for this unit. And their last version was Spears. That's the only unit that can deal with enemy monsters or cavalry in early stages of the game. They don't have a lot of armor, so you have to make sure they don't get shredded by the enemy missiles. But they can do a really decent work against enemies' large units. For tier 1 unit, they have a decent charge defense versus large and charge reflection. Plus their Cloud of Lies passive ability will make them very useful, even though against tier 2 cavalry or maybe tier 3 cavalry as well, depends how you're gonna use them. This is a really good unit. First tier. Going up in a tier, we got the new units of Infected with shields. This is a really good unit because they have the poison on their melee attacks called Contaminated, which reduces the enemy's base weapon damage and their leadership. Also, this unit is immune to psychology and has the Cloud of Flies, which increases its melee defense up to 10. This unit is very good holding the lines, with also their physical resistance and missile resistance. And remember, all Nurgle units has extra health, so it's always helpful, and shield is always a bonus against the missiles. Their second version with the great weapons, that's your damage dealer variant. They also get the same poison attacks, contaminated. They have a huge armor piercing bonus, so they're really good at dealing with the armored enemies. They're like Nurgle zombies, so therefore they have immune to psychology, also Cloud of Flies ability, physical resistance and missile resistance. They're gonna benefit from missile resistance much more than the shielded version because they don't have a lot of armor, but their melee defense is really good, so it's a really good tier 2 unit to deal with the enemy armored infantry. Third version with dual weapons. As we know in this game, everybody who can dual wield has a bonus versus infantry. So this version is also amazing against infantry because it got the poison attack Contaminated, has a decent bonus versus infantry, immune to psychology, Cloud of Flies will make them even more hard to deal with for your enemy, and 10% of physical resistance and 5% of missile resistance can be also beneficial. These guys are not as armored as Chaos Warriors of Nurgle, but they cost less, and Cloud of Flies passive ability makes them a very useful unit at the early to mid stages. And their last version with spears. As we know in the vanilla version, Nurgle has a really hard time dealing with enemy monsters or large units like cavalries because they didn't have anyone who got the nice anti-large weapons. And what we all know about the Radious, that basically they just make new units that can be beneficial for their certain armies. So for example, Nurgle had the issues with dealing against large enemies, and we got a bunch of new units who carries the spear, which is a perfect weapon against large. This variant of Infected comes with shields as well. They also got their contaminated attacks, very nice bonus versus large. They also got the charge defense versus large, immune psychology, charge reflection, and Cloud of Flies. Without Cloud of Flies, their melee defense is pretty decent too, but with Cloud of Flies makes them even more better. Physical resistance and missile resistance brings them a nice decent bonus. You wanted more variants for your Chaos Warriors? Here we have Plague Warriors with shields. Definitely a +1 from Chaos Warriors of Nurgle. The only difference, they got a little bit less armor and less melee defense, but more attack. Also, they got the Plague Sword, which reduces the enemy's armor by 5 and their melee defense by 10. This unit can cause fear. Their expert or charge defense. Also got the passive ability of Cloud Flies and physical resistance of 10%. Definitely a better version for your heavy front lines. They cost 100 gold more, but I think they bring much more usefulness to your battlefield than the regular Chaos Warriors or Nurgle. And their second version with Scythes, that's your anti-infantry version, that also got Gift of Contagion, which reduces the enemy's leadership by 7, melee attack by 7, and speed by 20%. Also their armor piercing and has a nice bonus versus infantry. As a previous version, they cause fear, have a passive ability of Cloud of Flies, and physical resistance of 10%. Very nice armor, perfect tier 2 unit to deal with the enemy infantry. And the version with great weapons, that's basically your can opener. For their melee attack, they got the Armor Thunder, that reduces the enemy's armor by 20. The armor piercing causes fear, has Cloud of Flies, and physical resistance. If you're gonna add Cloud of Flies, which increases their melee defense with their armor, this unit is almost unkillable at tier 2. The only downside for the Nurgle army is their speed. They're very slow, as you can see. Just think of them as the slow tanks who can soak up lots of damage and also can deal good amount of damage against the enemy's army. Now we go to Pestigors, the first variant with shield. Beastmen who pledge their loyalty to Great Pop of Nurgle. It's your tier 3 axe infantry. They come with shield. Nurgle gave them the gift of Ferric Blight, It's a poison for their melee attacks that reduces the enemy's armor by 10% and the physical resistance by 5%. Also, they carry axes, so their weapon is armor piercing. They have a really nice charge bonus, cause fear. They are expert at charge defense, immune to psychology, as a woodsman ability, swarm of flies. It's a passive ability that affects enemies and reduces their melee attack by 6. Also, this unit got Primal Fury that increases its combat capabilities and a physical resistance of 10%. It's a very nice tier 3 unit for Nurgle army because of their speed. They're not like super fast, but at least they have a speed over 30, which is a decent amount for the infantry unit. But keep in mind, if you're charging with your army, just make sure these guys don't outrun your army and just gonna be the first one who enters the battle, because even though they have a decent armor and shields and a decent melee defense, fighting against multiple units gonna be not a easy task for them. Here we got Pestigors with great weapons, basically a version who deals lots of armor piercing damage, plus they got the same Ferric Blight ability, which reduces the enemy's armor by 10% and the physical resistance by 5%, which basically makes them forget about the enemy's armor and just do tons of damage to them. They cause fear, immune to psychology. Also, they get the swarm of flies, reduces the enemy's melee attack by 6, Primal Fury, makes them even more deadlier, and a physical resistance of 10%. These guys looks cool and do nice damage. In vanilla, we got the Forsaken of Nurgle, and here we got the Unforgiven of Nurgle. A better version of the Forsaken. The vanilla Forsaken were tier 2 unit, this one is tier 3. They're better at everything. They have more armor, more leadership, melee attack, melee defense, weapon damage, and charge bonus. Also, they got the magical attacks and a Strider passive ability from their counterpart. This unit, as the regular Forsaken of Nurgle, causes fear, has Frenzy, Cloud of Flies, and immune to psychology. Instead of physical resistance from a vanilla version of Forsaken of Nurgle, this one gets the missile resistance by 15%, which I think is more useful due to Forsaken of Nurgle being very weak towards the enemy's missile units and being shredded by them, so this one is gonna be more resilient against them and can withstand more damage. Going into a super heavy infantry, we got the Aspiring Champions of Nurgle, this one with shields. Got the poison attacks, Plague Sword, which reduces the enemy's armor by 5 and melee defense by 10. Also, it got the nice bonus versus infantry, causes fear, expert at charge defense, immune to psychology, and a ability of overwhelming odor. It's a passive hex ability which affects enemies in range and reduces their melee attacks by 5, charge speed by 5%, and charge bonus by 5%. Also, they have a physical resistance of 10% and spell resistance of 10%. This unit costs the same as the Chosen of Nurgle, but has much more potential. The only good difference of Chosen of Nurgle has plus 1 more melee attack than the Aspiring Champion of Nurgle. Their physical resistance, spell resistance, and all the passive ability makes this unit more deadlier. Plus bonus versus infantry, that's perfect frontline unit for your army for the same amount of costs. Why spend the same money for less when you can spend money for more? This one is a definitely better choice than Chosen of Nurgle. Their second version with the great weapons costs a little bit less than the regular Chosens of Nurgle. In melee, their stats are a bit lower than Chosens of Nurgle with great weapons. They have a little bit more armor and charge bonus. Their passive abilities makes them even more useful because they can cause fear, they're immune to psychology, and have overwhelming odor, which affects enemies in range and reduces their melee capabilities. And they have much more resistances than the regular Chosens of Nurgle. So I would definitely choose Aspiring Champions over than the regular Chosens of Nurgle. Here we got their last version with halberds. This is your anti-large unit. Like I said earlier in these videos, There is no such a version of Chosen of Nurgle who can deal good against large units of your enemies. So all the aspiring champions are getting the Poison of Ferric Blight, which reduces the armor by 10% and physical resistance by 5% against the enemies they're fighting. Very huge bonus versus large. This unit causes fear, expert charge defense, charge reflection, overwhelming endure. Also good against the enemy's fast large units because it reduces its speed and charge bonus. Has a physical resistance and spell resistance of 10%. I think these units are must hire units for your mid to late game because it clearly lays you better than the regular Chosens of Nurgle. And you thought that was the best infantry that Nurgle gets from this mod? No, it's not. Because the best ones are Man Reapers, this one with shields. These guys are complete beasts with a huge armor and silver shields. This unit has magical attacks plus Plague Sword, which reduces the enemy's armor by 5 and melee defense by 10. They don't get the bonus sources infantry, which is fine because you have other units who can deal the damage. This one is perfectly to hold the lines. It can cause fear. Got expert charge defense, perfect vigor, immune psychology, and Miasma of Rot. Passive ability that affects allies in a range that replenishes the vigor. So all the ally units in your army who stand near this unit will replenish their vigor 1% per second, which is amazing, so they're not gonna lose their combat capabilities over time, which makes this unit as a really nice support unit. Also, it got 2 resistances, the physical resistance of 10% and spell resistance of 20%, so even the enemy magic's not gonna do tons of damage to this unit, which is very nice. Second version of this Man Reaper is the anti-infantry, also got the magical attacks and Gift of Contagion, which reduces the enemy's leadership by 7, melee attack by 7, and speed by 20%. Good bonus versus infantry, causes fear, perfect vigor, immune psychology, and a passive ability called Gloom of Lies, which increases its melee defense and can cause terror to the enemies whenever it's engaged in melee. Also the physical resistance of 10% and spell resistance of 20% like all the Man Reapers has. And their last version was the Halberds. Your anti-large version of this unit comes with magical attacks and the Gift of Contagion, which reduces the enemy's leadership 7, melee attacks by 7, and speed by 20%. Has a huge bonus versus large. Causes fear, expert charge defense, perfect vigor, immune psychology, charge reflection. The passive ability of Miasma of Rot, which replenishes the friendly's vigor by 1% per second. Very useful ability, and this unit has a resistance of 10% for physical damage and 20% for spell damage. Very nice units, but they're very expensive. Definitely for late game, each of this unit will cost you about 2k of gold. So keep in mind, if you have a weak economy, maybe choose aspiring champions. They cost a bit cheaper and can do a good job too. But these guys are definitely tanks on a battlefield that can do lots of damage and support your army. Next we go to cavalry. In vanilla version, Nurgle didn't have a lot of variety for the cavalry units. Here we got the Plague Knights with swords. Basically your cavalry that can do good against the infantry. Got nice bonus against them. Has a poison attack, Plague Sword, which reduces the enemy's armor by 5 and melee defense by 10. Causes fear, immune psychology, and got 10% in each missile and physical resistance. Their second version was lances. Lances for the cavalry is like spurs for the infantry, so they have a bonus versus large units, which is a really big bonus for them. They have a Ferric Blight, poison attack that reduces the enemy's armor by 10% and physical resistance by 5%. A huge charge bonus. Good amount of armor. This unit can cause fear. It's immune psychology. Has 10% resistances for physical and missile damage. This unit has a high leadership, but even for the Nurgle army, this cavalry is very slow. The speed is only 67. So that's as good as you can get for your cavalry units, but you can make them still useful, which is nice. And the most expensive cavalry that you can hire is the Chosen Plague Knights. This one with lances. It's a shock cavalry has a melee expert, very nice armor, lots of leadership. Mediocre speed, has a magical attacks and the gift of contagion, which reduces the enemy's leadership by 7, melee attack by 7, and speed by 20%. Nice poison against other big units that can run fast. Because your cavalry is not that fast, this poison can make them run about your speed or even slower. Has a really good bonus versus large, huge charge bonus, cause fear, perfect vigor, strider, immune to psychology, nice resistances against physical damage by 10% and spell damage by 20%. And their version with swords, that's your anti-infantry version, has the same magical attacks as a plague sword, which reduces the enemy's armor by 5 and melee defense by 10. Decent bonus versus infantry, can cause fear, also has a perfect vigor, strider, immune to psychology, resistance against physical damage by 10% and spell damage by 20%. This unit is so tanky that basically you can use it as a regular infantry. You can just charge them into the front lines and you can just keep them there. They can do lots of damage and can tank lots of damage as well. Going to the monsters and beasts, the Nurgle faction got the ogre units. This one called Tainted ogres with great weapons. As we know, the ogres with great weapons in this game are considered anti-large and has a nice bonus versus large. Also, this unit comes with the contaminated weapon, which reduces the base weapon damage by 5% and leadership by 7 of the enemy units that he's fighting against. Decent charge bonus, can be used as a siege attacker, cause fear, wall breaker, as an ogre charge, and a passive ability of Swarm of Flies, which reduces the enemy's melee attack by 6 in a small range. Also, it got physical resistance by 10%. And they said that the great weapons are armor piercing. Well, yeah, Mr. Obvious. Of course, so all the great weapons in these games are armor piercing. Second version of this unit with dual weapons. This one is gonna be anti-infantry, has the same poison attacks, which called Contaminated, which reduces the weapon damage by 5% and leadership by 7. Causes fear, you can use them to break walls, has a ogre charge, passive ability of Swarm of Flies, reduces the enemy's melee attacks by 6, physical resistance of 10%, just more monsters to fill your Nurgle army. And if these ogres were not enough for you, we got 2 more. This one's called Plague Ogres with great weapons. A better version of the previous units, but obviously it costs more, so that's a definitely late game unit. It got poisons for its melee attacks, bonus versus large, armor piercing, can be used to destroy enemy walls, causes fear, as a strider, and a passive ability Cloud of Flies. For the big units, a really nice ability which adds plus 10 melee defense, and as we know, the big units don't have a lot of melee defense and can get easily outnumbered and killed, so definitely a nice bonus. Has a 10% of physical resistance and 15% of missile resistance, which for ogres I think it's a must because this version doesn't wear shields and doesn't have a lot of armor, plus it's big, so missile resistance is always good. And their version with dual weapons to kill your enemy's infantry has a very nice bonus against infantry, like huge bonus, so they can do tons of damage, like they can just shred through lines of your enemies. They also got the poison on their melee attacks, which will prevent the enemies from fleeing from them. Their armor piercing causes fear as Strider, also Cloud Flies, which increases their melee defense by 10, which makes them even more deadlier. The longer they can stay in battle, that means the more enemies they can kill. Has a physical resistance of 10%, missile resistance of 15%. It's a very nice unit. I would prefer it over the one with great weapons just for killing enemies with ease. And that was it. That was all the units that's been added from a Radious mod to a Nurgle faction. The Radious team did its best to fill all the gaps for the Nurgle army, all the missing units that they needed in order to be more balanced. They got infantry that can deal against enemies, large units. They got more cavalry units. They got some extra monsters who can be also good against enemies, large units, and infantry. I know that in the vanilla version, their army was tanky, but with Radious mod, the army got even more tankier. I tested all the units. I feel like these units can do very good against their own counterparts, so it's definitely a plus. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope I'm gonna see you again. Enjoy.